Right, 10 minutes past 4 on 99.3 Nigeria Info. Wherever you are, this is the public square. And we discuss all the big issues that have happened in the week going by. Politics and development and everything that's been going on the front pages. Today, we're going to be looking at the ban on motorcycles and rickshaws, what you popularly know as Keke, Mawa, and Okada for the commercial motorcycles. Beginning from Saturday, so we're counting hours to the takeoff of this big story. We'll look at a number of talking points here. How is this going to impact business? How does this policy affect people? Was it well considered? Will the Lagos government restriction on this means of transportation make transportation better or worse? We follow us on program on Twitter at Public Square NG, at Rotimi Sankore, at Ninja Ma, at our Obo, as well as at Nigeria Info FM. On WhatsApp 0809-597-5805. That's our WhatsApp number. Rotimi.
Thanks, Ahoho.
Great.
Well, our economists, who are definitely not coming by Okada or Keke, are running late. I was about to say, Tunji and Bolahon, if you can hear.
Yes.
If there is go slow, just get down and join the nearest Keke before they are decommissioned. But Tunji has arrived, Bolahon is on the way, and if you are wondering where Ayobe is, we hope she should be here soon.
Great.
Okay, so before we start on the Keke and Okada restriction, let me say that please, for everybody that has sent messages saying, when are we going to deal with this coronavirus matter? Possibly next Friday. So hopefully it will not come into Nigeria, but if it does, it's not going to be easy at all. And we'll try our best to help with information on how to mitigate it.
Right. Right.
But today is Keke and Mawa ban or restriction. And let us start, by giving you a rough idea, at least of places where you may be seriously affected. The ban covers 6 local governments: Apapa, Lagos Mainland, Surulere, Ikeja, Etiosa, and Lagos Island. And 9 LCDAs: Apapa Igomo, Yaba, Itire Ikate, Koka Aguda, Onigbongbo Ojodu, Ikoyi Obalende, Iru Victoria Island, and Lagos Island East. Those are places where, one way or the other, if you are touring, walking, or otherwise in those areas, you are going to be affected. So we will also provide you with more specific information. We'll provide you with more specific information on locations.
Yeah, which includes several hundreds of streets.
Yes.
Because I know a number of people have been saying,
yes,
is my street affected or not? I think the easiest way to help people even understand the puzzle is understand the situation is
yes,
play a jigsaw puzzle and imagine yourself being the man in the middle.
Yes.
And how do you get from this point to that point
Yes.
without getting into a trap, which appears to be all the affected areas somehow have you caught up. So if one part wasn't affected, you say, for example, to move from Obalende or TBS to Victoria Island, how do you get there to the place that hasn't been affected when you know that the entire route from Obalende through to, or if you're going through Ikoyi or through Bonikamp, you will be affected.
Yeah, so you may need your walking shoes
for a large part of the journey.
Or for a large part of the journey on Monday. For today, actually from tomorrow, because the ban or restriction takes effect on Saturday. So, three big questions. Will the restriction make the transport situation better or worse? We would like to hear from you. Do you think the policy was well considered? And how will it impact on business? In the interim, there is a poll up on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM, which asks you to let us know, will this make things better, worse, or you are not sure? Currently, it will make things worse. That is leading, and it's 67% right now for it will make it worse, 17% for better, and 14% for not sure. So please go to at Nigeria Info FM and vote. You'll be able to call us later and let us know yourself in life what you think. Ayobe has joined us.
Right.
Welcome.
Okay, so we can begin ideas on Public Square. Good evening, Ayo.
Good evening, Rahul.
Good.
Well, of course, the restriction.
Sorry, thankfully we're not going to be singing Sesame Street. You missed Rotimi singing Sesame Street last week.
Thank God for small mercies.
So people have been sending messages.
It was public education.
More like public singing. Okay, so
You mean scare them straight out?
no one could go beyond one line.
Well, as I said, there are this matter raises ideas, issues, because as you know, ideas is about integrity, democracy, ethics, and accountability. And one of the issues, one of the questions that has been raised is that where does this come from? You know, and the government in its publicity is saying it's the 2018 law, transport sector reform law of Lagos State that we are merely enforcing. Okay, so that's one aspect of it. And of course, the immediate response is, but that particular piece of legislation said that the ban on plying certain named routes would only affect those motorcycles which had an engine capacity of less than 200 cubic centimeters. And but the government in its publicity, the Lagos State government in its publicity, has been justifying, you know, the question had been asked, why must it affect Okada and, you know, similar ride-hailing, you know, people who use ride-hailing apps? Why is it affecting those? And it does seem to me that the government, if it's going to say that we are standing on the 2018 law, then it has to stick to that. I need to say that the integrity and democracy issue is about that particular law was passed after, you know, through the legislature of the House, and it was, I think it was section 15(1) of that law, which stipulated that the ban would that motorcycles with 200 cc's engine and above are exempted from the restriction. And that's why many people felt that the ride-hailing apps, of course, at the time when the law was passed, the ride-hailing apps were a new thing. But the point is that that is the law that the government says it's enforcing or implementing. If that is the case, then it needs to be clear about what it is implementing, because it can't just wake up and say we have decided that these are part of the problem, because the problems that they have listed range from the threat to life and limb the fact that some of these the general habit of jumping on and off Okadas and the way that they drive is in itself unsafe and threatens the life of the passengers and other road users. But they also give the excuse that that Okadas generally are involved in crime, and that they are because the immediate response has been, well, but isn't this, by throwing people out of work, going to increase crime? And the government's or the response of the publicity had been that that the Okadas are actually being used to commit crimes. But I think that that displays a lack of understanding of what ride-hailing is about. Because the whole point about ride-hailing is that you're leaving an electronic trail. It's not like my standing at the side of the road and flagging somebody down,
Right.
and then I just jump on. The whole point about ride-hailing is that your journey is documented. So if the Okada or whoever it is has picked up somebody who is who uses the Okada to snatch somebody's bag or something, and make a quick getaway, then the Okada at the point in time should be traceable by his own or her own service, and at the same time should be able to identify the person who did the hailing and so on. So that I think that there's a little bit of woolly thinking, and it's particularly disturbing because the government claims that it had consulted stakeholders before it decided to go ahead with implementing the ban. So I think that's one aspect of it.
And those same stakeholders matched, at least the stakeholders we are talking about now, which is the Keke and Okada drivers, marched to Alausa today to go and complain that, in fact, they were not consulted.
Well, in fact, yeah, and I think that it's a point that because the ride-hailing Okada apps, if I can call it, they don't consider themselves to be just any
Okada.
old Okada. They've gone out of their way to meet the requirements of the law. I did see that they had gone on a demonstration. I'm not aware of the others. But I think, Rotimi, that, the issue of rule of law is not a one-way street. And if anything, this law had been in effect since 2018 and even before. And it was passed, the legislation was passed. And because the assumption was, and the legislation stipulated, the 200cc limit, the belief is that the ride-hailing apps are excluded. And people did feel that this is actually a more, it's a saner way to go about these things. But then, nonetheless, we knew that apart from the ride-hailing, there was a whole load of, how do I put it? There was an army of Okada, which are not ride-hailing apps, whose engines are not up to the 200cc.
And many of them possibly not trained to ride properly.
And yet the government was not enforcing the law. It had passed the law and it had not enforced the law. In a way, we should not be complaining government is now enforcing the law. We should have been asking, why did government stop enforcing the law? And of course, the answer that occurred to many was that in a democratic situation where you need the votes of people, that government found it convenient to look the other way at a time when it needed votes, not just of the Okada riders, but also of their potential passengers. And so for political advantage, it said, well, we are not going to enforce this law. But it is legislation.
All right, we have to take ads now.
We'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue ideas. All right, welcome back. It's the behind-the-scenes laugh. All right, so back to ideas with IOB.
Yes, I mean, the reason why we're straddling the divide is because I could not jump onto an Okada and beat the traffic. And so, not that, I mean, come on, do I look like an Okada jumper? I'm terrified of the idea. But on the other hand, I would feel much more comfortable about a ride hailing. And I think that when the government says that it is, not part of its vision for Lagos, that's it's good to have a vision for Lagos. But the other part of this, because as you said, the consultation with the stakeholders, which are the stakeholders? Which stakeholders were consulted? Because we do know that even if we move our focus away from the ride-hailing apps, which had gone out of their way to comply with the law as they understood it by investing heavily in expensive motorcycles and so on.
And software.
Yes, and software and all sorts of things. If we even put them aside, are we saying then that, as I said, this army of Okada riders and Keke Marua drivers are not also part of those who should be consulted? Because even if the government is going to say, we are now coming to enforce the law, it's a question why the if they had chosen to treat the laws that they pass as maybe I will, maybe I won't affairs, why they should now feel that it's the law. So I think that is also a problem.
Okay, I think the other thing, of course, to really look at is why are we even in this problem in the first place? And it's because we don't have a proper mass transit system in a city like Lagos. So the Keke and Okada and the ride-hailing ones are filling a gap, and that gap exists because of poor public policy and investment. So,
we've always said that if you are going to throw somebody out of the window, you must put the cushion there first. And the question is whether the transport, such as it is, because we've seen, the BRT lanes, we've seen the bus terminals and so on. We are still sleeping over the red line and the blue line, but I dare say that at some point the government will...
Those are supposed to be the trains, if you are wondering what the lines are.
Yes. So the point is that it need not be a matter of... It should be a matter of carrot and stick, because quite frankly, once the mass transit is actually properly in place, then people will not have to tell Okadas to pack up their business or to go to where their trade is, which is in some of the inner areas.
Rural areas.
Not even rural areas, because even inside Lagos,
there are areas... The inner streets,
yes,
where there is no public transport.
Yes. So nobody would have to tell them, because people would be only wanting to use them to get to where they can board
a train
the
or
efficient.
a bus.
Yes, and that is not what we are seeing at the moment.
All right. So thank you so much, Ayo.
You're welcome.
So we move over to Tunji, and hopefully Bolahan will join us soon. So
there's traffic everywhere.
There is traffic everywhere. There is
actually. I mean,
there is pre-ban panic.
40 minutes.
Yes,
40 minutes to get here.
If you think there is traffic today, on Monday, you may have to leave at 2 a.m.
I think we should also we shouldn't also forget that the whole idea of the Keke Marua was that it was supposed to be a safer form of transport for people who could not jump onto
the Okada.
And I remember that you may recall that when we've discussed the idea of the amount that it costs for some of these constituency projects, the empowerment projects that end up with providing a Keke Marwa. We said, is it that they cost so much more than an ordinary person going to buy on the street because they include some measure of training and so on? And the verdict seems to be that no, there's no training. They just get the machine.
And believe it or not, someone asked me once, whether it was only the Marwa people that make this keke, and and I had to explain it that actually Marwa is the former military governor.
Who was the first person to bring the tricycles into Nigeria? So it was named after him.
Yes. So, I mean, the kekes are also, in quote, a legal introduction to help with the transport system. But before we...
well, I should say goodbye from the ideas.
From the ideas, thank you.